I'll start with a very morbid thought. Uh, when when your funeral happens and they it's not your obituary, but when people talk about their memories of you, what would you like to have those memories be? Uh, in my situation, there's a whole lot of things. Um, I would want to be remembered as a loyal friend, uh, a great husband, a world class dad and papa, um, a good teacher, a good counselor, compassionate. I mean, a big list, but all of those things that I think are important that I would want to be remembered for basically go in one bucket. The bucket that's marked good deeds. I would want to be known for my good deeds. And it'd be fine with me if I was remembered because of, some good words, encouraging moments. Although that would be fun for me, if you can be fun after you're dead. I don't know. Anyway, but I want to be most remembered for my good deeds, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But there's this about good deeds. My good deeds will not get me into heaven. That's not it. My good deeds, God is not in heaven going, oh, goody, way to go. Let's give you a trophy. No. My good deeds and your good deeds in the best possible way ought to flow out of the grace of God that is at work within me. My good deeds are not so that God will be pleased with me and take me into heaven. No. My good deeds are the result of the fact that God is nuts about me. And Jesus is at work even now getting my mansion ready, or my room in the mansion, however you want to interpret it. But it's not like, well, God's waiting around till, you got to reach a threshold here of good works before, and then St. Peter at the gate will say, well, oh gosh. Boy, if you hadn't have done that last good deed, you'd never get in here now. Well, first of all, there's nothing in the Bible that gives any indication that St. Peter is going to be at the gate. Secondly, the Bible in the book of Revelation talks about books that are opened that are about what I've done in my life and with my life. The most important book is the Lamb's Book of Life. And my name is there not because I did enough good works to get included, purely and simply because of God's grace in my life that I have embraced and said yes to through faith. All right, that's pretty deep theology to start with, and it applies to what, believe it or not, what Paul wrote about widows that should be included on the list. The last thing he says is helping those in trouble and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds. There's no believer. There is not a single child of God who that would not be the most noble aspiration is to be devoted to doing good deeds. But don't ever mistake that your good deeds are the things that put you in good standing with God. I think a lot of, and I'm kind of on a hobby horse here, and I'll try not to stay on it for very long, but I'm going to say there are a lot of people who believe they are saved by grace through faith. And we go back to Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10 as the proof of that, verse 8, 9, and 10. Well, His grace saved us, but my devotion to good deeds is what keeps me. Ooh. We kind of have distorted the fact that God's grace saves me and it keeps me, it empowers me to be devoted to doing good deeds. All right. Move on, Steve. Well, then Paul has some pretty terse words for younger widows, beginning in verse 11, this is 1 Timothy 5. As for younger widows, do not put them on such a list. In other words, remember, he said, pardon me, this is back in verse 9, that a widow, to get on that list, the first requirement is she is over 60. So life expectancy in century 1 was not what it is today, not even close. So we're talking about these are old widows. As for younger widows, don't put them on such a list. For when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. Now, I will not deny that there are times when Paul seems harsh toward women, and this is kind of harsh, that younger widows, they want to marry because their sensual desires overcome them. Okay. But we got to keep reading, because he is not saying younger widows shouldn't marry. Let's keep moving. At verse 12, thus they bring judgment on themselves because they have broken their first pledge. What is their first pledge? Was it pledged to their deceased husband? I don't think so. That's not their first pledge. I think their first pledge would have been loyalty and devotion to Christ. That's what I think Paul's talking about. That's what this sensual desire that overcomes them would entail. When my temporal desires, my sensual desires. Now, sensual does not mean only sexual. It has to do with the senses in general. But when those desires, I would even say, when any desire overwhelms my first commitment to Christ as the Lord and leader of my life, the owner of this property, that's a problem. And I think that's what Paul's talking about. For when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. Thus, they bring judgment on themselves because they've broken their first pledge. Besides, they get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house. And not only do they become idlers, but also busybodies who talk nonsense, saying things they ought not to. Holy smokes. That's a dark picture. And it's kind of in my mind, you see, I believe that Paul wrote under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. I also believe that the Holy Spirit was using Paul as his vessel, and the message of the Holy Spirit, God's message coming through Paul, was pulled through the filter of Paul's experience and life, right? I wonder Kind of sounds like Paul had had a few negative experiences with younger widows who just, they basically were in retirement. They were, their new husband was taking care of them. They get in the habit of being idle and going about from house to house. They were just social butterflies. And their idleness wasn't the only problem, but they were busybodies who talked nonsense. Oh, gosh. Now, okay, keep going, Steve. All right. In verse 14, so I counsel younger women to marry, to have children, younger widows, to manage their homes, and to give the enemy no opportunity for slander. So, Paul's not against younger widows marrying. In fact, his thing is, I counsel younger widows to marry, but not to sit back in the limo and just flit and flight and all the, the profile of the widow he doesn't want on the list is really strong and really ugly. And so he says, instead of that, marry, have children. Now that see if you all already know, at a certain point in life, women without a miraculous intervention become unable to conceive and bear children. And so that puts them in a discreetly younger category, to have children, to manage their homes. In other words, be a mom, be a wife, let your home be your office. Now, I am not a guy who says the place for a woman is in the home. She should not have a career outside of her family and home. That's not me. I have 3 incredible daughters, and all 3 have fabulous careers. They're tops in their field. Honestly. And I think I would say that even if they weren't my kids. I am grateful for that. But all 3 of them also understand their career is their secondary occupation. Their primary occupation is their home and family. I am not a guy who says women can't follow Christ's design and work outside their home. No, I don't believe that. But it is difficult, and it requires finesse and maturity and dedication for a career woman to realize that her primary career is her family, her husband, her family, her home. This is very difficult. And in Paul's day, it was not an issue. Very, very few women had a career outside their home. Now, see, you remember the younger widows that he profiled that were busybodies and they were lazy and jumping from one house to the next and all that kind of stuff. If they had had a career outside their home, they would have had time for that. But in century 1, there were so few opportunities for a woman to have that kind of outside career. And Paul is just being very practical here. And he is, I don't think the principle is women should not work outside the home. No. Please, I hope you hear me, that I'm saying your primary career is your home if you're a married woman. Secondary career, give it your best. Represent Christ well. Okay. Thankfully, my time's up. and you don't have to endure anymore. I'll see you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.